Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the second day of Riga conference, and we are continuing our discussions on very different security-related issues. Topic for today's discussion is future of NATO, adapting to new realities. And this panel is organized together with Norwegian Embassy to Latvia, Ministry of Defense, and Latvian Transatlantic Organization. I will be chairing this discussion. My name is Nato, and I'm chairwoman of Latvian Transatlantic Organization. The issues to be addressed today are very diverse, because whenever somebody tries to talk about future of NATO, you never know where one or another person will arrive at, because it can be about future of NATO, future for NATO, and future with NATO. And indeed, in last couple of years, we have faced a lot of difficulties. Mention the most important one, the spread of pandemic, which definitely influenced security situation in countries and also defense posture of NATO member states. But there were diverse discourses on this matter, starting with mental health of NATO and ending up with a wide range of different type of risks and challenges. Starting our discussion, so I will a little bit explain what is the composition of this discussion. We will start with introduction by Christian Odegaard, Norwegian ambassador to Latvia, and then we will follow with presentation of Colonel Olsen, who will present different views on his recent book. And the title of today's panel, Future of NATO, Adapting to New Realities, it's a title of his book. We will have a very good background for the discussion later on. And then reflections will be provided by three speakers, which I will introduce in order of their presentations after Ambassador's introductory speech. Please, Ambassador, floor is yours.
Good morning, dear friends, dear audience. As Ambassador of Norway to Latvia, it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcoming you to this Riga conference side event with the title Future of NATO, Adapting to New Realities. We thank the Latvian Transatlantic Organization for organizing this event, and also cooperation partners. The idea to this event came about in a conversation between the embassy and Nato earlier this autumn, and the background is the publication of the book with the same title, Future of NATO, Adapting to New Reality, that Professor Rosalina also mentioned. That is a book that came out this year, and it was edited by my colleague in London, Defense Attaché Jon Andreas Olsen, that we will hear later on in the discussion today. And there are many contributors to this book, higher officials and researchers from many of our allied countries. I hope that we, during the discussion today, will shed more light on both topics. How we believe NATO will develop and move forward in the time to come. And secondly, or which realities we do adapt to and will adapt to. None of these two main issues are exact science. We don't have exact answers. There are many different opinions. Today's seminar is supported by the Norwegian Embassy in Riga and the EEA and Norway Grants. You could ask, what has the EEA and Norway Grants to do with NATO? Transatlantic relations and the Security Conference in Riga. The short answer is a lot. There are many interdependencies between security and social and economic development. The aim of the 2.8 billion EEA and Norway Grants program is to promote economic and social development in 15 NATO member countries. At the same time, they are members of the European Union and the European Economic Area, all in Central and Eastern Europe. Here in Latvia, we now run a program of around 100 billion euros, supporting democracy, civil society, justice sector, environment and climate, fighting corruption and economic crime, and so on. All this has to do with security. And as NATO is both a military and political alliance, we see a clear link between what we do on European level and in the European Economic Area and what we do on the security side. We see it as a vital interest for Norway, for us to contribute both to the security and to the development of economy and society in the Baltic region. Baltic security is our security. Having lived in Riga the last 2.5 years, I'm happy to witness the close and friendly cooperation in the Nordic-Baltic area, as Norway and Latvia are allies in NATO, small countries with borders to a big neighbor. We face many of the same challenges. A fun fact is that the length of the land border between Latvia and Russia and between Norway and Russia is more or less the same. In addition, Norway has, of course, a long maritime border line with Russia in the high north. And that is the reason why we are so focused on security in the Arctic, in the high north. A commonality between the Baltic states and Norway is, of course, that we are more dependent on the security guarantees provided by NATO and our allies than larger states would be. That is also why cooperation within the alliance, and particularly transatlantic relations, are fundamental for our security, to Latvia's security and to Norway's security. Then what about realities? Which realities? Which realities to adapt to? Whose realities? We are situated on the world, where we are situated on the world map is a reality. But when we start to describe our position compared to our neighbors, we might find different realities. The President of the United States seems to have one reality when describing the outcome of the US elections, while the President-elect, Joe Biden, and most European countries seem to have another reality. President Putin in Russia often seems to describe a different reality than the one we perceive. In Europe, there are many realities. Where or who should we or could we trust when we formulate our policies? Not seldom we have to deal with competing realities, also within NATO. The world today is different from the world a decade or 2 or 3 ago. In a world with different narratives, different descriptions of what was earlier clear facts, attempts of even rewriting history and historic facts, we have to listen carefully when deciding what is what is our reality. It's a paradox that the enormous flow of information, the global information village, and easy access to information does not necessarily make us see the world and the challenges clearer. The digital revolution also paves the way for hybrid conflicts and attacks on our vulnerabilities. That's new challenges. When we look back, we see a NATO that for more than 70 years provided peace and stability in the Euro-Arctic, Euro-Atlantic Atlantic space. We are most thankful for that and proud of the success. The question is whether we will see the same the next 70 years. We can hope, but I'm quite sure that we will have a totally different context the next decades. We might notice some elements already that we can describe as new internal and external challenges. These challenges already now create unpredictability and uncertainty when we are to shape the future of the alliance. We hope we will hopefully hear more about these factors today in the discussion. If I were to give a piece of advice for the next 7 decades, it would be prepared for the unexpected to happen. We should be prepared. If I were to express hope, it would be that NATO will remain a solid alliance, not only to secure our freedom and sovereignty, but also continue to be an alliance that secures democracy and values that our Western free societies are based on. And of course, a short-term hope for a constructive and enlightening discussion here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Indeed, you provided a very solid background for our further discussion. You raised so many issues. And indeed, the tie between reality and future is a very important one. And usually these are not politicians, but those who are working on the ground, who keep their hands on what is happening in international security landscape. Before giving floor to Colonel Olsen, I would like to encourage everybody who is following our discussion to send in their questions via chat, and those questions will be forwarded to us, and after the end of the first round of presentations, your questions will be answered. So now I will give floor to Colonel Olsen to present main findings of the study which was done by you and your team. Please, floor is yours.
Good morning from London. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Professor Saneta,
No sound.
Osolina, and big thank you to your team. Thank you to Ambassador Christian Ødegaard for those opening remarks. My point of departure is this publication. Next slide, please. I would submit that NATO is the most successful political and military alliance in modern history. I would argue that NATO has remained relevant for more than 71 years because it has stayed committed to its original purpose, values, and principles for the North Atlantic Treaty, while at the same time continually adapting to this changing strategic environment. We have gone from 12 to 30 members without changing the mandate. And that dual track formula of commitment to the very idea of NATO, while at the same time adapting to new realities, should serve as a guidance for success in the coming years. In order to do so, I would like to emphasize 6 challenges for the future of NATO, 3 internal and 3 external. As you can see here, the first internal challenge is to re-energize NATO's cohesion. The second is to revitalize US leadership. The third is to rebuild European defense forces. And then the external challenges to contain revisionist Russia, to counter international terrorism, and to comprehend the rise of China. Next slide, please. The first internal challenge is to re-energize and to maintain NATO cohesion. Democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law constitute the very foundation of our alliance. It is our collective vow. Whenever internal disputes have risen among NATO members, such as the Suez Crisis in '56 or the French withdrawal from the command structure in '66, or the intermediate range nuclear missile debate in the early '80s, or the Iraq war in 2003, a unifying purpose based on shared values and strategic interests ensured that the member states eventually managed to overcome these disagreements and stood together when it mattered. Next slide. Cohesion is the rule over all rules. And I would just like to emphasize Article 4. It is becoming increasingly more important. It has been invoked 6 times, 5 by Turkey and once by Poland. And that, together with Article 5, is the basis for our cohesion. Next slide, please. The second internal challenge for NATO is to revitalize American leadership and transatlantic unity. NATO was and is designed for US leadership. Without the US, there is no NATO. And the purpose of this slide is to emphasize that the president is not necessarily almighty. The Senate, the Congress has quite a bit to say. European members must convince and reassure US policymakers that no NATO member is stronger without the alliance, that NATO offers the best way of influencing developments in Europe, and that there is no substitute for the transatlantic bond. The European nations remain America's most consistent allies. They contribute more willingly than other countries to military missions and give political legitimacy to operations that are overwhelming American in composition and scope. The US access to European air and naval bases brings American forces closer to the Middle East, to Africa, and parts of Asia. NATO is important for US security and prosperity. Next slide, please. The third internal challenge for NATO is to rebuild European defense forces. This is based on a fair burden sharing, and it's the ultimate expression of alliance solidarity. I would say it's NATO's holy grail. Next slide. It's all about sharing costs and responsibilities, and Secretary General likes to use the 3 C's. It's not only about cash, it's also about capabilities and contributions. It is, of course, important to move towards the 2% goal. It is an indicator of commitment. It is also important that 20% of that defense budget is committed to capabilities, to high-end capabilities, and we must contribute 360 degrees. We need to strengthen capabilities and update our contingency plans because future NATO has to be on high readiness. And Article 3 is important in this regard. It is not only about strengthening defense, national defense, it's also about societal resilience. And we have seen how vulnerable we can be with cyber attacks, with various terror attempts, and more recently, pandemics. And I would like to emphasize that NATO and the EU are strategic partners. We are 2 sides of the same coin. The currency of that coin is security and prosperity, and we must find ways to complement each other rather than compete. Next slide, please. Let's move on to the external challenges. And what the 3 external challenges have in common is that they contest Western values and rules-based international order. So challenge number 4, When all is said and done, Russia is still NATO's most significant external challenge, and NATO will succeed if it engages Russia not individually, but together, so that we can approach Russia from a position of strength. Russia respects only the language of power, so to contain Russia, NATO needs to continue its dualism of credible deterrence and capable defense on one hand, and find ways for a meaningful dialogue and active engagement. Next slide, please. We have to realize that that Russia can operate full spectrum. It has recapitalized its nuclear program. It has invested and reinvested in conventional capabilities with an emphasis on two parameters, firepower and range. And we also see that Russia has the capability and willingness to use hybrid tactics and cyber attacks. Next slide, please. From a northern perspective, we are especially concerned with the Bastion defense concept that has recently been revitalized. And as you can see from this slide, Russia needs sea control of its inner bastion to protect its nuclear submarines around Novaya Zemlya, based in outside Murmansk at the Northern Fleet. And if you go further down to the GIUK gap, the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, Russia needs sea denial, and it would like to disrupt any kind of activities further south, because if there is a crisis in Europe, we depend on open sea lines of communications and reinforcement from the United States and Canada. Next slide, please. The fifth challenge is international terrorism and extreme violence. And NATO is shifting now from military interventions to assisting selected partners, and NATO cannot succeed alone. It will do so in cooperation with other international organizations. Next slide. So NATO is approaching security from 360 degrees, and it is important that NATO not only look to the north and to the east, but also to the south. And the package for the south is intended to project stability in our southern parts. All NATO members remain committed to defeat Daesh, and there is a new commitment to some of the Middle East and North African countries, and especially Afghanistan and Iraq. And what we are talking about now is a shift from intervention to assist, advise, and train, what we in the good old days called security sector reform, to establish good governance and democracy and these kind of values, and also capability building for a state, not only the military and the police, but also the state functions. Next slide. The sixth and final main challenge for NATO, as things stand now, relates to China. NATO must comprehend and respond to China's emerging goals and strategies. And summarized in one sentence, China must become subject to the transatlantic conversation. NATO needs to develop a common strategy. Not only can the US deal with China, NATO as a whole needs to have a common approach to the challenges. Next slide. We need to assess the security implications of China's global assertiveness, and not literally but figuratively. If NATO does not go to China, China will come to NATO, and we see that with recent investments in our part of the world. There are military footprints on all continents, and there is that element of offensive cyber operations that makes us uncomfortable. And at the heart of all of this, we have to understand the security implications of the new Silk Road Initiative. Next slide, please. The Silk Road Initiative is indicative of China's ambitions, and although there is plenty of good in it, we must not be naive about the security and defense implication. And it's not a zero-sum competition. Rather, NATO should adapt a calibrated and transactional approach, accepting that relations with China will remain both conflictual and cooperative for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I would suggest that NATO faces 6 challenges, 3 internal, 3 external. It doesn't do justice to all the authors of the book, but if we had to summarize it and categorize it, I would say that these 6 challenges would be indicative of the book's main message. We have to first re-energize NATO's cohesion, that is the overall rules. We have to revitalize US leadership. Without the US, there is no NATO. Let's not fool ourselves. The third is to take more responsibility in our countries, in Europe, and rebuild and recapitalize on our defense capabilities. And then the 3 external challenges: to remain committed to contain revisionist Russia, to counter terrorism and extremism in all its forms, and comprehend and respond to the rise of a more ambitious China. So in conclusion, I would argue that as NATO returns to its original mission, which is to ensure deterrence and territorial defense, it is also looking more broadly now at projecting stability and security in its southern region, southern neighborhood, and it's also looking at strengthening global partnerships, including Indo-Pacific region. Thank you for listening to me. I'm ready to follow up with comments and respond to questions later on in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel. Indeed, very clear message. 3 internal, 3 external challenges which NATO should consider seriously for years to come. And now I would like to join the panel, our 3 commentators, the 3 speakers. Here we have Jānis Kalsbergs, Under-Secretary of State and Policy Director at the Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Latvia. The next speaker and commentator will be Martin Povešel, who is Deputy Minister at Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, in charge for security and multilateral issues, and also Marian Mayer, who is the State Secretary, Deputy Minister at the Defense Ministry of Slovak Republic. I would like to ask all 3 participants, and starting with Jānis Kalsbergs, what else do you add to the list of challenges which NATO is going to face in the foreseeable future, besides those who were already mentioned by Colonel?
Thank you, Jeanette, and let at first welcome on behalf of Ministry of Defense all you in digital Riga conference. I can only express my deep regrets that we can't make in face, but I believe there is a strategic patience required for all of us to keep us in safe distance, to be stronger together in our main efforts and our main missions. So on the questions, you know, Janet, I'm starting to wonder what we all discussed, because yesterday we had a panel as well, and we so much agree to each other. So where is the problem? On the main answer, you started yourself of 3 ways how we see. So Latvian version is clearly with NATO. So that would be formulation. We can't see any chances for us, in fact, for different paths to keep our sovereignty and independence. Therefore, direction, as Colonel Olsen explained, is very clear. And as we all so much agree, I would like to put maybe in different ways. I would not add in particular one different challenge, which would out of bigger concept. But first, and the most important effort, as Colonel Olsen already pointed, let's start with ourselves. And you were noting as well of mental health of alliance. Nice. So the question whether a patient can diagnose his health himself. So, but let's try. And I do think the main problem is really when we look internally. And here we should start looking in our own internal differences. And we see, of course, that our enemies, which were on the left side of presentation, external challenges, are always using this. So as weak we are and fragmented we are, more vulnerable we are. We see challenges to our democratic values, so versus as well populism coming in. So we need to address those things. We need to realize problems we all face. We see a lot of economic questions bumping into a political discussion. So we need to address with a transatlantic bond, global economic balances, European balances, not speaking of military discussion, strategic autonomy. So that's one of the questions. Honestly, we still don't understand this. So what does it mean? And we do think our strategic autonomy could be right place within NATO. And I fully agree. Unfortunately, again, I can't object to Colonel Olsen on this. Definitely COVID is another good challenge for us to see how we overcome. And I do think, in principle, we do quite well so far. So second, definitely, is to our region, and I would call it a short-term challenge, is Russia. And again, Colonel Olsen was quite well depicting. We just see that even during COVID time, no military exercises were postponed. They kept their pace, in fact, intact. We see aggressive rhetorics, and I would just name one. Zhirinovsky, who was advising to arrest in Lithuania Tikhanovskaya and bring to Belarus and make a death penalty to her. And just remember during Crimea when Zhirinovsky was among the first ones who was speaking about nuclear attack if something happened, and later it was reverberated as well by President Putin. So this is really serious. We see that Russia, again, is not only in Baltics, it's clearly in Arctic, and it's in the Mediterranean. So it's much wider, it's 300% degree look. And of course, on a long-term perspective, as a global competitor, clearly China is, and I will not devote on this. So the question is, what really to do? And definitely answer, as I started, the problem is in ourselves in the first place, because this is something we can really change. So we need to start with ourselves. And the first is really to understand the scale of problem and irreversibility of our problems. So we must really understand this. This is the first of psychotherapeutic, as human things to do with ourselves. Secondly, clearly, to find in ourselves political will, and what would be translate in a money way, I would say, as a minimum 2% for GDP. And then we need to start what we are doing. In fact, there is a good thing that slowly our big train is starting, called NATO, is starting to move, and nations are starting to develop our capabilities, and there are multiple. It's extremely complex world. You can see what happens as well in Nagorno-Karabakh, that you can, I yesterday was using a comparison with Goliath and David. So this difference in between big and small is really something we need to figure out. Who is big and maybe vulnerable, and who is small and smart, and could be vice versa. So that's something we need in a capability sphere. Therefore, new spheres like space, like cyberspace, strategic communication are things we need properly addressed, but not at the stake of conventional forces. I remember those years when it was considered by military specialists that tanks are obsolete. Sorry, no, but it depends from the context. We really need to balance our military capabilities. Definitely, transatlantic unity is at the core. Again, I'm sorry, it's boring. I can't really dispute with you on this. I do think another smaller things which we realized during COVID as well is coming is our military mobility, or mobility of goods in principle. So again, there is no competition in both. I do think if we have better military mobility, so our roads, procedures, railways are open to our allies and friends, So better for us because economic is a part of our resilience, and resilience was mentioned. And closing it, a few things from Latvian side. What we are doing, I'm definitely so far proud. We are managing very well. Our budget is already in the parliament, and we are waiting for final adaptation of budget, which will be for next year 2% plus, substantially plus at this moment. Of course, we don't know effects. COVID so-called second wave is already here. We only need to prepare for the third wave, and most probably for the fourth wave as well. But and there will be budgetary implications. But so far we are doing our homework in this quite well. We are keeping our readiness of our troops, so we try to limit and be very careful, but organize exercises, and we are trying to do it together with our allies and partners. We are working heavily on host nation support in order to, again, welcome, and I'm expressed here, especially having two of the nations like Slovak Republic and Czech Republic here for your contribution to allied security. And finally, comprehensive defense and resilience. That's something we are spending a lot of time in my country. We are moving even to establishing defense lessons in schools, which will try to take several baskets of starting to train for young kids what in reality is resilience, with opportunities as well to train in the field, but that will be a voluntary thing. We are working with NGOs, we are working with entrepreneurs, with business people. So we are trying really cross-institutional and cross-national effort. Of course, this is a long job. You can't make neither your capabilities in 1 year nor society to be resilient in 1 year. This is a effort for definitely a decade. So I would wish ourselves strategic patience and immediate action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jānis. You very rightly mentioned that we have to start with ourselves. And by the way, shortly before the Riga conference, one of partners of the Riga conference, public opinion survey company Norstat, made a survey for us to identify where Latvian society now stands on its attitude towards NATO. And actually figures are very convincing, and support to NATO in Latvia is growing. And I think there are different reasons why it is happening, but I think one of the reasons is that there is an overall commitment to defense of the country, to protection of the country, and also acknowledgement what are main threats and what has to be done. So it's not just an organization which is somewhere outside and somewhere, but it's an organization which is here in the country, and this self-confidence in resilience and in defense is definitely here. So thank you very much. And also you mentioned strategic autonomy, and interestingly enough that since pandemic, strategic autonomy is again mentioned more and more among European politicians, and it's not about defense anymore. Actually, health autonomy, it's something what the whole European Union faced in the beginning of the spread of pandemic. We were not autonomous enough, and health is a strategic issue, and it brings us again back to resilience. Thank you, Jānis. And now I would like to give a floor to Martin Povešel from Czech Republic. And what would be your list of challenges to NATO?
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really sorry that I can't be with you in Riga. I would love to be in your beautiful city. But I'm also delighted that I can take part in this conference, at least in this modern way that was so forcefully pushed upon us as one of these side effects of the ongoing pandemic. And I wish the conference all the best. Let me start from saying that both Colonel Olsen and Jānis covered a lot of ground, and I must say that I do agree with what they have just said. They, I think, captured the main elements of what the challenges for the future of NATO are. But I do not want to go away, Janetta, from your question, what else do we see as challenges for NATO in order to shape a prosperous and bright future for us that would at least match the more than 70 years of NATO's history that we have behind us. And I have basically three comments to make as far as this is concerned. First, I would mention that, and I think Olsen alluded to it, I would mention the relations between NATO and the European Union. We Europeans basically are half of the body of NATO, and the healthier the European part of the body will be, the healthier will be the body, the entire body as such. And we have over time seen that the relations between our two organizations have not always been smooth. We have been encountering a number of hiccups, and basically do not know how to move this relation into what we feel strategically should be. And it's not only about cooperation in the military sphere, but also in other areas where we should focus on the potential that we see in the two organizations. Politically and economically, we are extremely strong, and we have to find a way to use all this potential flexibly and efficiently enough in order to complement each of the organization with the strength of the other. Now, how to do that is not a simple question. We know and understand the underlying problems, but we think that we should, from both sides, do our best to find a way around those problems in order not to hamper the potential and not to reduce the full scale of it, full depth and breadth of it. I'm of the opinion that we need much more informal communication between the two organizations. Now, it's true that over time, over the past couple of years, we have made a substantial progress, but we have not moved into the core areas. The second challenge that I see, and it is related to the EU, also related to the EU-NATO relations. Very often we define our unity on the basis of a common denominator that is relatively low. That is a true reflection of the complexities that exist worldwide, but also among us. But I think we should do our best in order to raise the level of the common denominators that we are ultimately able to agree on. Now, again, we are all aware of the underlying political issues and different perceptions that we have about many things around us. But we think that, again, with a more intense, focused, informal communication between and among us allies, we could prevent issues turning into problems at a higher political level and find ways around them, and in this way arrive at common denominators that might be or should be higher than those we often arrive at, or we have been able to arrive at so far. Now, I want to underline one thing in this context. We should not yield to the temptation to abandon the consensus principle. Consensus is something that gives us real strength, and the moment we give up consensus, we start deliberating the alliance into pieces, and we no longer will be able to act as one. So the way out in our way should never be a formula consensus minus whatever we understand as the possible minus figure. That should remain, consensus should remain our firm principle, and we should never, give it up. But I rush to add that, like we do in the military area, and I'm thinking back of a number of NATO military operations and the way they started, we should probably think of how to exploit the potential of starting things within a coalition of the willing within the alliance, and to develop the coalition of the willing into a full-scale alliance activity. The third thing I think is crucial for our future is to continue to develop a more profound common strategic understanding of the world around us. That covers, in my view, both the challenges mentioned by Colonel Olson within the alliance, as well as those external. Intensive debates on the strategic environment should lead us to a clear vision of what the alliance's role in the future in the world should be, and clearly take it as a basis for how we organize our day-to-day work. I'm not trying to suggest that this is not happening, but I do want to underline that this is something that must be a result of the ongoing reflection process within the alliance that, as I see it, clearly leads us to the process of defining or redefining the strategic concept of the alliance within foreseeable future. And this should also be a principle that should guide our deliberations inside the European Union, where we are currently engaged also in this process of strategic deliberations and developing the notion, the concept of what we understand under the headline of Europe's strategic autonomy. And there I want to underline what was already mentioned, that the Europe's strategic autonomy should not be understood or interpreted in military terms. It's a much broader concept that we certainly feel is urgently needed, and this process is being sped up by the ongoing pandemic. So this, in conclusion, would be my three elements that I consider important to address systematically and persistently in the months and maybe years to come, so that we make sure that the future of the alliance is at least as prosperous as its history has been so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You again underline three very important elements which could be placed under the title cohesion between the EU and NATO. Then very important element of cohesion, its consensus principle. And I also would like to underline that consensus principle is precondition to act as one. And very often there are criticisms heard from different players, civil society, also non-governmental organizations, some political groups, that consensus is out-of-dated decision-making procedure. But you very rightly underline that it is precondition to act as one. But also what you mentioned regarding the common vision on strategic environment, it's also a matter of cohesion, whether we can agree or we cannot agree on environment which can be challenging, but at the same time it can also could promote cooperation among members of the alliance. So thank you very much. And now I would like to give a floor to Mr. Meyer. What would be your list of challenges what NATO is going to face?
Good morning to Riga. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for setting this debate and this conference in spite of the difficult situation we are facing these days and these months. I would love to be in Riga with you, but at least we can talk in this format. My advantage as the last speaker and commentator is that I have the possibility to react on what has been said already, but at the same time disadvantage that many of really smart issues have been raised already, and I can actually confirm everything what has been said because all of that is very relevant. And maybe I would just add some view from my country and from the Central Europe to the challenges and to the issues that NATO should face and is facing, seeing from the national perspective. Of course, there is no doubt, and it has been said already at the very beginning by Ambassador Odegaard, that there is no doubt that alliance is the most important security, and not only security but political actor in transatlantic space. There is no alternative for European security and defense. This is the clear message from all member states, and this is the most important point we are coming from. At the same time, there are many challenges, as we said and heard already, and continuous internal adaptation is very much needed. In this aspect, we welcome the work of NATO Reflection Group and NATO Reflection Process in this regard. And we hope that it will end up with the new strategic concept, which will somehow react on those challenges, because whether we like it or not, the situation is changing, and in comparison with the strategic concept which is valid currently, there is some need for some changes, although the three pillars on which NATO is based on are still very valid and a very important one. I would maybe just come back to those challenges which have been mentioned already by Dr. Olsen, and maybe just give some views from Slovakia. For us, speaking about external challenges, for us, two of them are very important ones, and we are trying to focus on them in the process of preparation of new strategic documents, security and defense strategies. They are at the very final stage of the preparation, and they should be adopted by the government and then by the parliament in upcoming weeks, and maybe 1 or 2 months by the parliament. And those two challenges are Russia and China. Still, NATO has done, speaking about Russia, has taken tangible steps to deter Russia. And that is very important. As was mentioned, enhanced forward presence is a very important part of these deterrence. And I'm proud that Slovakia is part of EFP and will be part of EFP until the EFP will be there. This is the strong commitment from the Slovak government, which have been confirmed by the new government after March this year. At the same time, there are some needs to politically work with Russia, and we didn't. Alliance, I would argue that alliance still didn't do enough to politically sufficiently to deter Russia. No doubt, Russia is moving its modus operandi to the gray zones, using Novichok, using different kinds of activities, also to focusing on the countries of Central Europe, including Slovakia, and that's why it's very important to be vigilant, and it's very important to have the processes prepared to react and counter-react to these activities. At the same time, Russia cannot be contained, so it means that we need a dialogue with Russia, and we need to be very clear inside of NATO what are our goals in discussion with Russia, and we should be very cohesive, I would say, as the word of cohesion has been used already. And we know that business as usual have not been met, and it will not be meaning in foreseeable future, unfortunately. China, at the same time, I'm happy that already there is a very vital discussion inside of NATO on this topic. We know that there are different opinions, different approaches of various member states, but it's clear that there is no longer only, when talking about China's ambitions, it's not only about economic ambitions and objectives on the global level, but there are also clear political and military ambitions, and we need to be prepared for that as well. And we need to share the concerns of the countries between us. Speaking about internal challenges, which are influencing the national policies, of course, and they need to influence the national policies, as has been mentioned. The first and the maybe the most important one are resources. We know that the situation is very challenging for all of us, especially when calculating the cost of pandemic. And also in case of Slovakia, it's a very difficult debate about the resources. On the other hand, we, as a Ministry of Defense and with our armed forces, we showed that the armed forces, and I'm confident that it's the same in all countries of alliance, that the armed forces are one of the most effective, or not even the most effective organization and body or institution to react on different various challenges, various problems, including pandemic, including the health problems we are facing today. So also thanks to that, because Slovak armed forces were very active, not only in the spring, but in last 2 weeks, we conducted the most difficult and most the most, I would say, complex operation in regards to mass testing of the Slovak population. And we succeeded to test more than 3 million people in 2 days all over Slovakia. So we showed that the armed forces is important body also facing these kind of challenges. And thanks to that, we were able to discuss with Ministry of Finance and with the government that the additional resources, not only because of this, but also because of other needs, additional resources are needed, and that's why this year will be the first year ever since 1993, when the independent Slovak Republic has been established, with the 2% of GDP for defense. So this is very important message we can share and we can have all together. At the same time, what is important is not only to speak about figures, but also to speak about how to spend the money, of course, and it's related to the readiness of our forces, and that's why the framework, the increased resource framework, which is very visible across the alliance, needs to be used to the fullest. So our forces need to increase their ability to react to contingencies, and we are also working. Based on this prediction, we are working on our modernization projects and our increasing of our capabilities to both military and non-military operations or kind of actions. At the same time, as it was mentioned, I think by Yanis mostly. The resilience of our societies. Everything is interconnected, and resilience, in our view, is not only about media education and the ability to recognize disinformation, which is very important, of course, applying of critical thinking to the information, but at the same time, resilience is about whole of government approach and about the ability to make common and very quick decision making based on the situation and based on security development in Europe and outside of Europe. So it's about clear description of the security environment and existing threats, and this is very important one. We are trying to do so. When I mentioned security and defense strategies, this was the process which helped us to involve many state and non-state bodies and institutions to the debate about challenges and about the security environment. I would also maybe mention three additional challenges, especially internal challenges we have and we feel. First, partnerships, as we saw, for example, in Nagorno-Karabakh in last couple of weeks. Working with partners is very important, and we need to explore options how to devote more resources to partnerships and how to engage more actively with partners. So that's why political consultations with partners can be instrumental in understanding the particular security challenges at the spot, and also, of course, to help to build NATO a positive image globally. At the same time, transatlantic bond, it was mentioned already several times, especially in connection with the new president-elect in the US, and also with the processes and consultations within NATO reflection process. Cohesion, as was mentioned in Dr. Elson's presentation, is a very important one and very connected to the transatlantic bond and how to make this bond stronger, and how to create a permanent dialogue between Europe and North America maybe more visible and stronger and more in this spirit. So this is very important and the crucial one, and I'm very positive on the future work with American administration to make this transatlantic bond not stronger only internally, because this was the case, and the US was very visible in Europe and especially in some countries, including Baltic states, but also to make it visible from outside and to make it the perception from outside to make it very strong. And the last point to mention as a challenge, technological convergence. We have to take into account the rapidly evolving technological landscape. Building a strong military technological cooperation among allies is very important in this view, and including of or involvement of new technologies and sharing of new technologies and communication on this is very important as well, and it has very much in common with those external challenges when it comes to China and Russia, as I mentioned before. So I would stop here and thank you again for invitation, and I'm ready also to comment on follow-up questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Indeed, so our list of potential challenges is growing by each speaker, and I assume if there will be more presenters, the list will be longer. And it means that at least you gentlemen will have a very tough agenda in front of you, because you are dealing with security and defense issues in your countries. We have approximately 20 minutes, a little bit more than 20 minutes for questions and answers. And questions already are coming in. And I would like to start with a question to Colonel Olsen. In your book, and also Mr. Meyer mentioned China as a potential challenge to NATO. And in a book, one of those challenges, it was mentioned that security implications of New Silk Road were not considered seriously. Colonel Olsen, why so? Why, for instance, European countries were so enthusiastic about this project? Was there really nobody took seriously security implications?
Thank you. I think it's been a transitional, a development process where we recognize over time that there are serious security and defense consequences and implications for high technology investment in Europe, in buying ports and buildings and getting access to our resources directly. So I think it's a process where we have come to realize that there are implications here, and that we can be quite vulnerable if we are not aware. So again, it's this resilience question that comes up. Is our society prepared for these kind of things? It's not only a matter of state security, but also societal security. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question to Jānis, so it comes from the audience. And the question is, how does NATO deal with its own internal disputes between its member states, like Turkey, France, Greece? Are shared values drifting? And I'm asking this question to you because you were also raising the role of democratic values in keeping alliance coherent. What will be your answer to this question?
Thank you, Janet. And in our part, there is none of your mentioned nations, so I definitely would be not the best replier to this. But what I would like to mention, if it should not be over-dramatized. It's not the first, I would not even at this moment yet call a crisis. Clearly, that was my first point. Let's start with ourselves and try to look whether our outside or external, as Colonel Olsen was putting, challenges are sufficiently important if you realize that we must really drag together. And I do think this is a question which comes in particular mentioning those nations over there. And this is a question more, I would say, of interests. Values is something we should respond to each and every action every day, as individually, as nations. Therefore, those will be always challenged, and we know that our external competitors are always trying to challenge our values. Therefore, I do think there was in history cases when alliance was called as in drift and splitting apart, and 17 years are behind us, and I really would wish that to have 70 years future at least. But Janet, if I may, because maybe I have the privilege to see as well those questions, and I wanted, and as resilience was mentioned, and here just widens, there's a question how to prepare for unprepared things. And resilience in our formula is definitely a thing which consists of several parts. Individual part, how you train, societal part, and institutional part. And then, of course, and it's mostly national-wide. So each of us have different traditions, legislation, and so on. So the part where we cover together as a resilience of different nations, even alliance, is less important. There are elements. But here, and what is really bridging across resilience in between nations, European Union and allies, is instinct of cooperation. You say it's contradictory terms. There are no instinct of cooperation, so this is developed. It's a cultural thing. So instinct is always isolation. That's something what really unfortunately happened even within European Union, closing borders. Of course, it was something which we didn't understood. Now now we have different problem. We have problems really to close borders, but it's in a sense good. Individual, we are not becoming more responsible. So here resilience part is bringing up numbers of our COVID victims. Therefore, something to develop, to learn how to cooperate within societies, institutions, and among nations. So that's something which is missing part. I would say not missing, but not so well developed as we would like to say. So that's very important on resilience. So if there will be, and most probably, as Ambassador was indicating, what will be the next, we don't know. That will be something we really don't know. And then if we know how to cooperate, it will definitely help us. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to keep this question open regarding resilience because it was asked in a very interesting way that military exercises can test military readiness. But how can we measure the efficiency of societal resilience to new threats? And as you mentioned, so there are more and more threats, more and more unexpected factors piling up. So how to measure societal resilience? Gentlemen, would you like to take up this question and answer it? Have you done thinking about measuring societal resilience? So, Mr. Meyer, maybe you could start?
Yeah, maybe. Yes. Very good question. Very good question, because this is something we are discussing actually from, 2014, from the situation in Ukraine. How to first make the resilience of the population stronger and more visible, and at the same time, how to measure that. Of course, there are maybe sociologists have their own ways, but in this aspect, it's a matter of deterrence. So it's a combination. I would combine it with the military readiness and with the readiness and resilience of the population. How quickly we have to, or we are able to react on the situation, and we show that we saw that in this pandemic, for example, although it's a non-military activity and non-military threat, it was very clear, to put it in more diplomatic way. It was very clear that there are many processes very problematic when it comes to crisis management, for example, in Slovakia, but not only in Slovakia, but also in the European Union. And maybe speaking about NATO, also in NATO, although NATO's role was not so crucial in this aspect. So there are many, I would say, ongoing challenges, many ongoing actions, many ongoing problems. We can see whether the society is resilient enough or is not. So, for example, disinformation campaigns, they are ongoing already several years. And we can see, seeing the situation on social media, at least speaking on behalf of Slovakia, it's something horrible. So we know that we need to, coming back to the sentence, we need to start from ourselves. For example, Slovak government knows since it came to the office in March this year, that we need to start from ourselves, because the government was not doing it enough. The government was spreading different kinds of messages, not one simple message that we are part of NATO, we are part of the European Union. We need to work together with our partners, and the results will be visible maybe in 2, maybe in 3, maybe in 4 years, and we can see that on different polls. For example, Globsec, our organization here in Slovakia, is making polls many times a year, and we see that people are trying to be somewhere in between, those in-betweeners, between the East and between the West. It's 50%. Those people are disoriented. Those people don't know where the values and where the democracies are coming from. So we need to work with these societies, and yes, to make ongoing maybe tools and to use different tools how to measure the resilience. First, we can make the polls measuring resilience on disinformation. We can make crisis management exercises to measure how we are resilient, or whether we are resilient enough when it comes to some internal problems, as pandemic, as different kinds of disasters. We can have military exercises to measure how resilient we are towards military threats. So I think it's a combination of different tools and combination of different factors. And yes, it's not so easy when how to measure the resilience of the society, because at the very end it will be still some summary of different factors and summary of different results, and maybe putting it together, we will be able via some assessment, annual or biannual assessment, to say that whether we are resilient enough, or at least better or higher than the previous year.
Thank you. Jānis, you wanted to add something?
2 points. One, I wanted as well this small element of resilience as disinformation. In Latvia, we are used for disinformation for 30 years. Therefore, society is quite resilient to this element of this. But I wanted part of COVID. I do think it's an excellent example where we see answers popping in. And here is interconnected world. So each individual, whether I'm wearing mask or not, there are those who don't even believe there is a COVID. But questions then, it comes down to the government as well, whether we people, we can't be all the time just resilient if we see that government is not really acting on these things, not having reliable, trustworthy answers. So there is this cooperation, a dialogue in between government institutions and individual. And to measure, of course, at the end of the day, I do think there is not particular, maybe sociologists can ask questions in opinion polls, whether you feel the answer is right or not, but you would see that government, at the end of the day, is supported. People are, I do think, Swedish version of trying to put it without, not under law to put to keep distances, to close things. That was part of individual responsibilities. That was their way to see. And so if this is function, I would say society is quite resilient, and they would be ready for unexpected again. But this is something, there must be dialogue. It's not only on individual level, there must be dialogue in between government and institutions and society.
And thank you, Jānis, for bringing this issue up, because when we are debating today future of NATO, one could ask why in between the debate of future of NATO we are bringing resilience issue up. But actually the point is very simple. The future of NATO to a very large extent depends on how strong are relations between the government and individuals, government and society, because otherwise whatever policy governments will actually decide upon, they could be undermined and questioned by society, and coherence, this domestic coherence, will not be there. So this is a very much NATO-related issue. But I would like to bring some other questions into our discussion, and one of the questions is asked about consensus-based decision-making, and I will probably address this question to Colonel Olsen, whether this consensus-based decision-making doesn't make NATO response slower. Is it really the best system for novel threats appearing in the gray zone? What would be your response?
Thank you. I believe that consensus is one of the key principles that has ensured the success of NATO. Although the US is in a league of its own in so many ways, the consensus principle allows all our nations, smaller nations like Norway, to have a significant say. And when you reach consensus, you have a very powerful mandate, and there is sustainability to the agreement because all countries are on board. And by working on consensus, you bring a lot of issues up and you get a better understanding for each other's countries' concerns and sensitivities. So it helps you go forward on other issues as well. So I would be very careful with bringing up a different regime, because I think this has been one of the baselines, one of the key features of NATO as a successful organization over time.
Thank you very much. One more interesting question, which I also would like to address to our distinguished speakers. And it stands like that: as NATO expands towards facing new types of challenges beyond pure military threats, should the role of US leadership in NATO be revisited? If NATO is not anymore only about military issues, then probably there could be other countries which could take a lead, coping and responding to new threats and challenges. Probably this would be a question which I would ask all three panelists and answer very short in telegraphic way. Could we start with you, Jānis?
Thank you. I do think Colonel Olsen answered there is no replacement of United States overall leadership, because it brings to, and you know, transatlantic, it means Canada as well. So in Latvia, it's particularly important and fantastic ally. Can't be even better. And looking for other threats. You know, that's about NATO. Ask my colleagues. So in Latvia, we have Stratcom Center. In Estonia, we have Cyber Center. We have all across allied already those excellent centers, which in a way are leadership. This is a part of leadership to bring issues up. And I do think this is exactly the way how we should continue, and consensus is really a golden rule. Another partnership part is the question of European Union as well, is something to bring, especially for hybrid, if we call hybrid, from cooperation with European Union. And definitely European Union is extremely well prepared, or could be prepared if we do, knowing that all other instruments, economic, financial, agricultural, health and so on, are coordinated as a big part of NATO members / EU members. Of course, there is a bit of gap, but so that would be my answer to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer, what would be your take on this?
I completely agree with this opinion. I think that there is enough space or there are enough opportunities for anybody of us to be a leader in some aspect. So yes, of course, I cannot imagine somehow to substitute the role of the United States because its role is unprecedented, and that's very. I have the positive feeling about that, but it doesn't mean that when it comes to other threats, other challenges, that the other countries are not welcome to come up with their own views, their own tools, or their own ideas on how to react. So I'm completely agreeing with what has been said.
Thank you. And Colin Olsen.
I would re-emphasize that there is no substitution for US leadership. There is no alternative. NATO is designed for US leadership, and we have benefited significantly from that in the past. NATO was always first and foremost a political organization. It has a military component by all means, but it is first and foremost a political organization. And I would say that we have to be careful with presentism and think that current relations is the worst that we ever had. But looking back over history, we have benefited from each other's partnership and cooperation under US leadership. And we just have to continue with strategic patience to work towards a future where the US remains the leader, the political and military leader of our alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, Mr. Povešil left us because he had other obligations to do. And of course, we would be interested also to hear his opinion, but it could be expressed sometimes probably later. But here is one more issue pending, and also a question is related to this issue. You gentlemen mentioned several times the relevance of EU and NATO relations, either formal or informal, and sometimes this is some kind of dual feeling. We all are members of the EU and NATO, and in our strategic thinking we very often perform in different ways, except Norway, which is not member of the EU here in our company. But still, it's a very, very awkward situation that you have one personality, but one personality has two hats on. And you have to cope and to balance with two hats, not to lose any of them. And most recently also EU members came up with very ambitious PESCO plan. So what do you think? How this balance between dual memberships under two hats of one country can be balanced, and whether PESCO is a challenge to this relationship? Could we start with you, Jānis?
Thank you, and I just remember what Colonel Olsen said. We are two sides of the same coin, but I realize they never meet, because one is up and another is down. So therefore, maybe there is a problem. But if seriously, we have problems, and in particular having as well Norwegians here, because in a sense for European Union you are third partner. And so now we have Brits, we have Canada, United States. So there is a problem not in ambitious European Union. And I'm European, and we are all here in Latvia full-blooded Europeans. But question is of this ambition level. Ambition whether just to lead and to distract, or to have ambition to build. And I do think we are in between. I do think as former Defense Minister von der Leyen and current Defense Minister of Germany clearly pointed it out, for defense issues there is no substitute for NATO. And we here in Latvia are very well following this. We, Europeans, should develop our military capabilities. And again, there are much wider spheres, and I will just keep short to defense sector. There is a huge work to be done. And if comparison, European nations within NATO comprise only 20% of defense spending. So there is a huge job for us to do. Therefore, I would not say there is a perfect perspective not to compete, but to cooperate. And I will stick to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer, what would be your answer?
I think there's no doubt that EU-NATO cooperation and the level of relationship is the best as it ever been. So this is very positive. This is very positive result of the whole process in the last couple of years. For us, no doubt, as I started my speech, that NATO is the cornerstone for our security, and that should be the cornerstone of the security for all the European members of NATO. At the same time, we are strongly supporting European defense cooperation, and in this aspect, it's not in contradiction what I just have said. So for us, PESCO projects or other kind of activities and initiatives within EU on defense are comprehensive, in our view, making the European pillar of NATO stronger. But at the same time, we should get rid of those maybe words which are dividing us, like strategic autonomy. That is something we don't know after several years. We don't know what that really means. European army, what that really means. Those things, those words are dividing us. So we should get rid of those words and those ideas which are dividing us and make the situation more complicated. And we should focus on the real projects, as PESCO projects, very particular projects helping to make our capabilities stronger. And if a European pillar will be stronger, then NATO will be strong.
Thank you. And Mr. Olsen, you are non-EU member representative and you are defense attaché in the UK. So how you would approach this issue?
I think my ambassador will agree with me that Norway is the best non-EU European member. And our approach is that the European Union and NATO are two institutions, two organizations that are forces of good, with the same strategic objective, big picture, the same strategic objective when it comes to prosperity and security, international rules-based order, the values, the liberal values we have. So we just have to continue to find ways to cooperate, and we do cooperate on quite a few things, but avoid duplicity where we can and start finding synergies. And we are doing that, but it is sometimes difficult, but we will just continue to do that, and we will find ways to strengthen our cooperation. I think that's on the agenda for everyone, but we are better at finding faults than success stories in this, and there's plenty of success stories as well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I would like to continue our discussion, but unfortunately our time is up, and I would like shortly wrap up our discussion. I think that all of us agreed that there are a lot of unexpected in front of us. And NATO proved during 70 years that it is ready to face anything what is unexpected. And we also agreed on that NATO will be fit to take up whatever challenges unknowns will deliver in next years to come. But in order to be fit for unexpected, there's still shared democratic values are on the top of the agenda. So ability to agree, ability to come to consensus is one of the strengths of the alliance. And I would like to end up with a point which was mentioned by Jānis shortly before the previous round, that leadership is not about only to be the big and the mighty. Leadership is about bringing issues, not to be afraid of taking responsibility and not being afraid and hesitant to discuss sometimes, which is not an easy issue and not easy task to perform. So I hope that we will have more discussions on the future of NATO, not only in this Riga Conference 2020, but also Riga Conference 2021. So thank you very much, discussants, and thank you very much also everybody who followed our discussion. Thank you.